The Centre for Disease Control and the Federal Drug Administration, the organisations in charge of testing for coronavirus, have a lot to answer for regarding their response. It's a long saga of incompetence, arrogance, and neglect. When this outbreak was first made public in China, the CDC refused the tests that the rest of the world were using and insisted on making their own. Now, this might have been fine, but they botched the job. The tests didn't work, so they had to go back and create new ones. This led to not only a huge delay for the start of testing, but also an incredible shortage of tests. The CDC also created a giant bottleneck with the tests. Doctors had to get permission from the CDC before they were allowed to administer tests, and most of those requests are still denied. The first case of COVID in California went weeks without being diagnosed because the CDC refused to allow the doctors to test the patient for it. A further bottleneck they created was that until March 2nd, most states had to send their samples to the CDC, which meant that in those critical first weeks, precious time was lost shipping materials to Atlanta. On top of that, every test required lengthy phone calls with the CDC. By contrast, when states can perform their own tests, they're able to turn them around in a matter of hours. So why did it take so long for this to be allowed? But the CDC didn't just drop the ball in taking care of testing. They also banned other people from picking up the slack and creating their own tests. They made it illegal for competitors to provide tests and said that the tests must come from the CDC. This is completely unacceptable. When one infectious disease expert in Seattle started testing people without government approval and discovering many cases of COVID in the process, her group was told to shut down testing altogether. When they reached out to local health officials to let them know about the cases that were positive from their tests, they weren't thanked for their help in identifying cases, but instead were reprimanded by the CDC and the FDA. It's one thing to not be competent enough to take care of testing, but banning others from trying their best is on a whole other level. Then there's the FDA red tape. There are many research laboratories around the country that are well equipped to test for coronavirus. But because they're research laboratories and not clinical ones, their coronavirus tests aren't approved by the FDA, so it's illegal for them to test for coronavirus. Many laboratories have been trying desperately to get approval from the FDA to use their testing facilities for COVID and are being denied over and over again because they're not certified as a clinical laboratory under the regulations established by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Private and university laboratories all over the country have been halted by the FDA and required to seek emergency approvals to allow them to develop tests. But the whole approval process runs far slower than COVID is spreading, and the FDA isn't even granting many approvals or seeking to speed things up. Also, to make things almost comically bad, in order to submit their applications for emergency approval, applications are required to be mailed in, not accepted via email. To get an idea of just how catastrophic this delay is, COVID cases are doubling every 3 days. This means that a delay of 3 days means twice as many deaths. Some places decided not to wait for the feds. Stanford, UC San Francisco, and Harvard enlisted their own virologists to design in-house tests. On March 4, Stanford Med deployed its own in-house coronavirus test. Mammoth Biosciences, in collaboration with UCSF, was breaking land speed records in prototyping and development to create an entire detection system so quickly, but now they have to wait on FDA approval before they're allowed to use it, and that approval may never come. FDA granted emergency approval for a new molecular test from Abbott Labs that scans for the presence of the COVID-19 genome and can tell if someone is infected in under 5 minutes. Although it's portable enough to be used in any healthcare setting, it's only allowed to be used in certain labs and hospitals that are already running tests. Biotech startups are working so fast on COVID-19 solutions that Paul Buchheit says a week is the new year for them. But the FDA is moving at snail's pace evaluating these things. Eventually, they stopped blocking emergency use authorizations for standard testing. And even though this didn't even include all this amazing new innovation, testing capacity in the USA still soared. This is what happens when the FDA gets out of the way. And the awful truth is, while right now so many people are being hurt, there are all these amazing new innovations that are not getting through. Many organizations, including the Gates Foundation, started offering home testing kits that would allow people who fear that they may be infected to swab their noses and send the samples back for analysis. At-home testing is great because it decreases the risk of exposing infected people to others. But then, on March 21st, the FDA banned at-home testing kits. All the companies who'd started collecting samples were required to destroy the samples to comply with FDA guidelines. What we're seeing is that the FDA and the CDC are acting like any other monopolist. They're not allowing competition, and it's costing lives. Banning competition and delaying emergency approvals has turned what could have been a manageable outbreak into an uncontrollable disaster that is killing people and financially devastating millions. The response of the CDC and the FDA in all of this has been unacceptable, and my only hope is that healthcare institutions, biotech startups, and non-profits continue to innovate and succeed in going around them as much as possible. A huge shout out to all of my supporters on Patreon and Float. As you know, at the moment, all COVID videos are being demonetized by YouTube. So it's because of these supporters that I'm able to keep my channel going. So huge thank you. And if you liked this video, then please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much.